Hello, Elle. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's first thing in the morning for you, and you're only a couple of months into your new job at McAfee, so I really appreciate you finding the time to do this.
Hi, Vicky. It's so good to be connecting with you again.
I know it's been a long time since we last saw or spoke to each other, but saw each other in person was probably about 14 or 15 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I can't believe that. It's terrifying how time flies. I mean, it's a platitude, but it's a platitude for a reason.
Well, you've been very busy in all that time. You've held some pretty heavy titles at huge brands. So, Chief Brand Officer at Ford, Executive of Creative and Brand at PayPal, VP of Brand at EA, and now VP of Creative Brand and Product Marketing at McAfee. So, it's pretty obvious why I wanted to talk to you about branding and marketing. Thank you again for joining me. So, let's start with you clearly get branding and marketing and have a passion for each discipline. Where do you think that comes from?
Well, I when I was growing up, I used to say that I either wanted to be a fine artist or a barrister. I used to say that at my parents' dinner parties, and it made all of their friends laugh. And then I really wanted to be an artist, and so I went to art school, but I felt like I wasn't able to be as relevant in changing culture as like the artists of the past who I had been really interested in. And so I felt a little bit disillusioned and a bit confused about what I was going to do next. Decided that I would study art history, but then started doing internships in marketing and branding because I realized that advertising, whether people like it or not, is the number one creative medium that people get exposed to in their life, in the era that we're living in. And so it does shape culture. And I got really interested in the ways that advertising and marketing was stereotyping or not stereotyping people, carrying harmful norms. And this was pre-purpose marketing, like before there was a lot of narrative about that, before it was a mainstream thing. I was really interested in like Naomi Klein, no logo, like taking a kind of anthropological perspective on it. And so I was like, well, I want to learn it as a trade and I want to learn it as a craft, because if I'm not going to be a painter or a sculptor, then I want to be a part of making culture, and I want to be a part of making culture for good. And so it was actually my sort of mission statement to go into marketing and branding to help harness, I guess, the ad dollars, like the marketing dollars and the media formats, to do good things, and, to do good things for commercial gain as well, but for those two things to be hand in hand.
You just reminded me, and you did actually mention it before we started recording, about speaking at my event, Copy Cabana. So that wasn't 14, 15 years ago, that was 2016 or 17. And that's when I invited you to speak because I really loved your angle on changing the conversation in marketing so that women are more considered than they have been before. So that's taking us off into a slight tangent, but sorry, I did forget that until you were just talking just then. But back to talking about what we're here to talk about, so branding and marketing. Some people just don't get that good branding. So you're talking about making a difference. Some people just don't get that good branding does make a difference. It can lead to good business. So was it at Ford that your brand strategy shaped the strategy of the organization? And can you talk about what you did there?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of became, when I got really interested in brand transformation, that started in my agency era, where I realized that by creating a North Star for business leaders, that could express itself in marketing, for commercial returns, but it also can express itself in product. And it actually started when I was working with the BBC and rebranding Radio 1 and Radio 1 Extra, and making sure that they both had these discrete roles in servicing youth audiences, but working really intensively with the actual studio leaders on what they were there to do as they were expanding out of being radio stations to being sort of like full platform content creation, like online as well as radio and in festivals. And so that love for brand strategy being the driver of what you do in the world, which might be what the studio does, or it might be what a product does, started a few years before. And I applied that way of thinking to the work that I did at EA, and also to the work that I did at PayPal, because it was really at PayPal that I was first exposed to product marketing and like writing value propositions, like taking a brand strategy and then taking the value pillars that need to underpin and reinforce it, like the actual pillars of human value that you create for people or for businesses, and then looking at a product roadmap and going, what would we do differently and what would we stop doing in order for that to be true? And it all came together at Ford, because Jim Farley is an ex-marketer, which people said, that can be a great thing or it can be a terrifying thing, because there's nowhere to hide when you come in as a very senior marketer if the CEO was one themselves. But I found it to be a great thing, because in one of my first meetings with him and his executive leadership team, we were discussing some potential, what I would call like propositional language, right? Brand strategy language for the North Star for the company. And there was a lot of like head nodding and like, yeah, that sounds good. It sounds like we could stand for that. But he looked around the room and he went, but what would you do differently if this was our brand strategy? And there was silence. And I think, the point that he was making is that we spend a lot of time, crafting words. And, you're an incredible copywriter. Like that's the foundation of what you do and what I've always admired about you and your writing. And words matter. But if people don't do something differently as a result of the words, when you are a strategist and words are what you are bringing into the business, then, you have, it's one of my favorite things to say to team, like strategy without execution is just slideware. And so he was really landing on like, what would you do differently and what would you not do? And then he expressed it as, what I want Elle to do is to bring us a blueprint for decision making for everything that we do in the business from now into the future, that can help us to solve the problems that we have identified and meet the goals that we have identified, which is the corporate strategy. And as a result, I need you to give her your time, because if we're not making decisions differently as a result of this brand strategy, then I don't think we have a brand strategy at all. We're not going to sign it off. And so that was when I sat with all of their leadership teams, and we actually created a sort of almost like a Harvard business school, like case study style approach, where I got each business unit to identify its 3 top challenges in decision making. Like, what are the 3 problems that you have? There's 3 decision inflection points where it's a problem that like keeps repeating, or it's a problem where half of the organization wants to do A, the other half wants to do B, and so you're paralyzed, or it's a problem that we've just never known the answer to, and so we've just kicked it forward sort of indefinitely. And through a lot of workshopping and conversation, we articulated, like, these are the 3 problems that we have in integrated services. These are the 3 problems that we have for the Ford Pro business or for the dealership experiences. And then after we'd articulated those, we went and we looked at what is the right blueprint for decision making. So I don't have one brand strategy template that I like. I'm not one of these people who's like, this is my brand triangle. I like to work with different jigsaw puzzle pieces, like potential levers that you can pull. And so deciding the shape of the brand strategy is the first decision we need to make. And so for Ford, we needed a brand strategy that had a proposition, that had a clear design target, like an aspirational audience that everything at its highest possible level could be designed towards. And that aspirational audience needs to be, a psychographic based audience that I guess anyone could see a version of their best selves in, if you see what I mean. A bit like if you have a body, you're an athlete, like Apple being for the creative classes, like almost everybody has a kernel of creativity. The whole point about Nike is that everybody has a body, and so athleticism should be accessible to everybody. But it's a belief system that you can bring people towards. And so we needed an aspirational audience. And then we needed a new approach to segmentation that could make us the sum of our parts. So the brief that I gave to the business for the brand strategy was, how do we turn Ford into the love child of our icons, Bronco, F-150 and Mustang. And so we built psychographic lifestyle audiences around the three equity areas of our icons so that the future state of product would be closer to the icon status of those vehicles, even when we were not making vehicles in those series. And then we also aligned our comms to that so that we could go to market to appeal to the lifestyles of those three areas and use our hero experiences to drive the equity up even more. So the fact that Ford was returning to racing gave us a really highly visible moment to build more equity into Mustang and all vehicles that could cluster around Mustang, and the kind of people who might want to drive a Mustang, and the kind of people who might want to drive a Mustang but can't afford a new Mustang today, and therefore how do we service those people? And so then you get these really specific briefs that you go back into the GM organization to and the design organization to, and it helps us decide what we make differently, what we don't make. And so that was the shape of it. And then we would test that through the problem statements that we had outlined for all of the business units, which included internal business units like HR. And we went, how helpful are these strategic tools? How helpful are these levers? And there were some other pieces to that puzzle too that brought in another layer of complexity. But at the end of it, we had like a really strong map of what needed to be different in the business. And that map was not owned by me. It was not owned by the brand team. It wasn't even authored by me and the brand team. It was authored by everybody together, and not in an exercise in like corporate stakeholder management and optics, but in like a true collaborative mode that didn't lead to a diluted outcome, but actually like forced difficult decisions together. Another thing that I always like to say is strategy is sacrifice. And so if you run a really collaborative process to get to that strategy, the collaboration has to also involve tough conversations and sacrifice. And that was another thing that I think happened really well in that process to make the brand strategy the blueprint for decision making.
That's great. I completely agree with you on the collaboration. If you're away working on something that is integral to the business without including people around the business, it's much harder to get them to buy into what's new. Whereas if you collaborate with everybody along the way, I find when I'm working, they get really excited to think that they've had a part in creating what their brand voice is. So one of my most recent examples was with Jaguar Land Rover. I probably spoke with about 100 people around the business, and this was on the corporate side. So I asked all of them what they thought the brand voice should be, like to give me a word that would describe it. And I'm not exaggerating. Every single person said the same word. So then A, I was in no doubt as to what word to use, but B, they all felt that the result that I presented back to them felt right and familiar, but also that they had all authored it together, like you say. And then alongside that is challenging ourselves to do away with that propositional language that you mentioned. Like, not every brand strategy should be the same. Every brand is unique, so every strategy should be unique, and the way you present it should be too. Like, I really don't like being sent, when I work with a new client, the Unilever key or the brand archetypes. You can't, there's like a million brands in the world. You can't all fit within, I don't even know how many archetypes there are, but not enough for you to be individual. So I really like your answer. It seems like I asked you a loaded question, but because I thought I'd get the answer I wanted, but that wasn't the case too. It's just that we have our way of working in common.
Can I ask a question back to you about your word on Jaguar? I'm so curious what you do when everyone is saying the same word, but it like represents like an old state or a current state that you want to move past. Like, have you had a situation where there's been like really great consensus in a collaborative experience, but you actually want to move off of the consensus? And like, how do you do that?
It's a good question. I think whenever I'm brought in to a project, it's because the client is ready to do something different or do something new. So they're typically not holding on to something of old, and they're excited to see what somebody from outside the business with fresh eyes and a different perspective and a creative mind is going to suggest to them. So no, I haven't had that. I guess I'm lucky that I haven't had that. But people often ask me, how do you get buy-in from clients? But I always say, well, they've come to me because they want something, not because they want to carry on doing the same thing that they were always doing. But back to you, and not to focus on Ford because there's plenty of other experiences for you to share. But another thing that's really important is that you had the buy-in from leadership. You're the CEO who was a CMO. So I find it's really helpful when something new is presented to the business from the person who's as high up as possible, because people take notice that way. Have you found it difficult to sell in a new strategy? And I'm not asking you to name names, but without that sort of backup from behind you and above you, how have you found people? I guess I'm asking the question back to you. How have you found people responding to new strategies that you present to the business?
Yeah, it was really helpful to have that top-down mandate and that top-down leadership, and for that to be a really strong voice. And I've been in situations before where a leader has been much more of a consensus-based leader, or they haven't had the skill, like they haven't had the experience of really doing brand transformation or know what they're looking for when they're looking for brand transformation. And without the top-down, it can be hard to get the adoption there. Even if you drive a collaborative process, there can be a moment where I guess like the engagement wears out and they're like, okay, great, go do the marketing now. And we're like, oh no, wait, we need to do all of these things differently. And that can be really hard. I've seen that before. I also, even with that strong voice at Ford, because I'm a transformation person, I get brought in to do transformations, and I've worked in these big legacy organizations, like even EA had never really had a brand team and had been around for 40 years. And so there's a legacy organization there. PayPal, obviously legacy. And Ford, I mean, what a legacy, like plus 120 years worth of incredible legacy. And, one of the huge cultural contributors to like the America that I live in today. There was a lot of, well, we've seen that before and that hasn't worked. To which I was like, but we're doing it differently. This isn't just a language exercise. Or, really, we're all about F-150 and we're all about capability, and we're never going to be about anything else. And so it's wrong to try and move us on. To which I would try and show like the things that make us who we are today are the ingredients that help us transform into what we're going to be tomorrow. And so getting really clear on the inputs and then different outputs, like consistent inputs and different outputs, and helping people to be owners of those inputs so that they can go on a journey to the outputs. That bit was hard, like really hard. Sometimes I can tell the Ford story. It sounds like it was quite easy, but that part of it was really hard. And it's also just really important that you bring the equity with you. Like, what are the positive equities and how do you not throw them out accidentally? Nigel Bogle, I always think about BBH as being my like craft training ground. And he used to say like moving it on without moving it off, which I thought was really helpful. And I use that a lot still. I like little catchphrases to help people feel comfortable with the change that I'm bringing in.
That I've not heard that before, which is unusual because I thought I was pretty up on quippy statements like that. It reminds me of Emily Hayward at Red Antler. She says brand early, not often.
Yeah, and actually also I use early not often a lot, just with like communication to stakeholders, is when you're trying to change a lot, getting the balance right of communicating early and often and bringing people in early and often, showing them things that are still a bit rough, and also training the muscle for people who are not from a creative background to look at things when they're a bit rough and not nitpick the detail, you know, understand how to look at something directionally. I think that's an important muscle. Yeah, I like that phrase too.
Yeah, I advise the same with clients when they ask how they can implement and maintain whatever it is that I've created from then on. And I advise setting up like brand drop-in sessions, and it's not for you to come at the end to show how on brand you think you are. It's for you to come at the beginning and, you know, us decide together when, like, how to be on brand from the start, and then maybe even come in the middle just to check that you're on brand, because if it's a new voice or a new behavior, like, not everyone's going to be doing it correctly straight away. But so I love talking about brand legacies, and I agree with you, like, don't lose the equity, but use the equity to move you forward. But you can only do that when you fully understand what's happened before for the brand. So how are you, so you've been in lots of jobs, how are you onboarding yourself or receiving an onboarding process? And how are you onboarding teams? Because you've created teams within your roles. So I'm asking you lots of questions at once. Let's start with, how are you getting up to speed with a brand?
I really love Andy Nairn's book, Go Luck Yourself. There's just a few books that I like come back to time and time again. And one of the things that I like about it is that so often when we start a new branding exercise, we start it with like the problems with the brand. Now, I'm not very interested in the problems with the brand. I'm interested in the problems with the business that brand can solve. So I really like a problem statement articulation, but I usually am articulating the problem statements about the business, not the problem statements about the brand. With the brand, I like to look at, like, what are the, like, diamonds that we can uncover in the dirt? Like, what are the things that we have that we can use? I mean, and Andy's point is, like, you have to be successful, you need to be lucky. You know, he's like basing that on the name Lucky Generals, the agency that he founded. But he's like, what are your, like, lucky ingredients? And so I think about it like that. Like, what are the lucky ingredients? For EA, that was really interesting because EA had become a holding company that was really like a sort of faceless publisher. The center of gravity for EA was and always should be the creative studios and the creators who are making the games, and the players who they're making the games for. And so maintaining that creative idiosyncrasy, because the studios are also different, the games are also different. So idiosyncrasy has to be part of the brand. So that's really interesting, right? Because usually you're trying for a brand to be like super consistent, whereas we're like, actually it needs to be like as idiosyncratic as the creative output and as the creators themselves. But one of the things that I uncovered was the founding manifesto of EA, which is really interesting. And it was based on the idea that gaming wakes up your brain and gaming can be a creative force for good. And you know, electronic art and electronic artists was about them being like the future of democratized creativity having a positive societal and cultural effect. And, you know, a big part of the founding story of EA was that they were the first gaming publisher to make games about sports. And if you think about like the sort of tribe, like the tribal, like high school kid, dynamic back then in the 80s was there were people who played games, there were people who played sports, and there were not people who played sport games, and people who played sports didn't play games. Like, it was they were very different groups within those tribes, and so it was a really smart thing to bring those people together. And it also was a sort of positive cultural had a positive cultural output. And so taking those little ingredients of like what the founding manifesto was and the original intention, and the way I did that, actually, there was this amazing woman who worked at EA still called Nancy, and she was like, I think she was employee number 6, and she was running facilities. But I just sat with her. And I was like, and she like she had a archive that she just made herself. She just collected all of this stuff, and she was like, look at this and look at this and look at this old poster. And so we just sat together and we chatted about like why EA was the company that it became. And that was really important. Coming into McAfee, our founding story is not very relevant right now. You know, when I tell people that I work at McAfee, I've had a lot of people say, oh, I should introduce you to this group of like B2B marketers. It's so great to see you in B2B. And I'm like, you know, we divested our enterprise business when we went private a few years ago. Like, it's not B2B. It's direct to consumer. We have 94% awareness in the US, but the people who I speak to when I tell them I'm in role don't even know that we're a direct to consumer company. And well, I mean, that we're predominantly 100% now a direct to consumer company. And, you know, there's some, you know, controversy in our background, in our founding story too. And it's not relevant to who we are as a company today. We've got new leadership. We're backed by PE. We're doing really interesting things. And we're solving for the current and future state of AI threats escalating. And so it's really like our ingredients are really future facing in the role that I'm in now. So, you know, the difference between sitting with Nancy and like going through like an archival basement and sitting with PE and looking to the future of the business and the industry that we're building towards, like poles apart, right? And so I say that because I think there's no sort of specific onboarding method, but the onboarding philosophy, I think can best be articulated by Andy Nairn's, like, you know, find the lucky bits, and then I guess the tailwinds.
That's great, and I love the contrast in the two different experiences, because when you were talking about Nancy, I was thinking, yeah, everyone needs a Nancy because that's what gets you like all the information you're ever going to need. But you're so right about the McAfee situation. Sometimes you need to just keep your head looking forward rather than backwards, because that's why you're there, to move the brand on. I'm concerned that we're running out of time, and I've got so much more that I wanted to ask you. You mentioned AI, so I'm just going to go straight there so that I get that in before we have to finish. What did you say? You said something really interesting about protecting against risk. That's what McAfee are up to at the moment. I suppose that's quite private, so you can't say much about that. But I'm asking everybody how they're working with AI. And that's a really interesting use case that hasn't come up. Are you learning as you go? Like, how up on AI are you anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I've been fascinated by AI as a creative tool. I love to write. I've talked a bit about a project that me and my husband have been training an AI chef to create Michelin-style recipes that we make ourselves. We did a 6-course dinner party that was inspired by a new Irish Michelin cookbook, and then like also what's seasonal, what we're growing in our garden, and it's become like an amazing creative tool. And then I was talking to a friend about a GPT that I built called McCarthy Chaos Container, which is I just put it on voice mode, and then me and my husband have a conversation on Sunday night about our week. And so he'll say things like, I'm going to the dentist on Tuesday. Oh no, I'm supposed to be in Seattle on Tuesday. Okay, so actually I need to change the dentist to Friday. And I'll be like, kids have swimming on Monday and the dog has to, but we'll like be correcting ourselves or going, oh shit, there's a clash there, that doesn't work. And then it will write us our actions to resolve those clashes and like the briefing for the week and everything that needs to happen on which days. And then we send that as an email to ourselves. And that's how we arrange our week. And so it takes it's not a task that we have to do, because it's a conversation that we have to have, and then it does its own task. So I've been doing a lot of like, what are the best use cases for life, for work, for a while. It's really exciting working for a company that is solving for the growing threat landscape of AI. Like I can talk about that a little bit. I think it's like a lesser known fact that B2B spending in cybersecurity is increasing 40%. I think it's about 40% year on year at the moment because of the escalated threats that come from AI. And so it means that people who have, like majority Mac users, for example, people who have felt like they've been protected by their devices for a long time, or people who feel like scam protection is something for their parents, or something that, scams is something that happened to other people. The rise in threats is really shocking, and the number of people being impacted is increasing. And so being in a company that is doing something positive about that in this moment feels like, the way that I've been describing it is like quietly important work. And so it's not like the sort of sexy, shiny side of AI, or, I guess it's not necessarily sexy and shiny. Like we're currently watching this like AI war play out with OpenAI and Anthropic, and, playing out in a political spectrum. Over here, it feels like a really positive way to be engaging, to just be helping to keep people safe at large. And so there was a big part of the appeal for me in coming to McAfee was about that. And not, so that I could like be working in AI in the moment of this AI evolution, but more be supporting people in this moment where AI, increasingly becomes a dangerous thing.
How rewarding it must feel to be involved in something with, positive outcome that you're working towards. The other use cases you gave for AI, with it helping you and your husband manage your week, that makes me think of the rise in talking about using AI as becoming your agent or your personal assistant. And I'm not saying that no one else is doing that, but I haven't spoken to anybody who is. So it was interesting to hear you talk about that. But as a writer, I do have to come back to, you said you use it to help you write. Can you just tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, I was at the Female Quotient AI conference in November, and on stage there were a few people being like, yeah, AI writes my emails, and I was like, no, because I can tell when AI has written people's emails, and it feels so impersonal. I'm really careful about how and when I use AI to write. So I use AI as a sparring partner. Like for inspiration, if I'm like, I've had these 5 thoughts about news stories that are happening right now, and I feel like they're connected, and like, what do you think the thread is? And then it will be like, maybe this. I'll be like, no. Oh yeah, that was my thread. It's like helping me to get to places in my own brain faster. And I also I've built some like brand strategy tools in AI that help me to ingest information faster, but I specifically have it go through like modular thinking. So like, get the obvious ideas out of the way. Now compare them to category trope. Like I try and like weed through like obvious linear thinking so that I can get to lateral places faster, or like have specific lateral prompts. And it also has helped me scale myself, like when other people use those tools, but I would never get to like an actual concrete output just using that AI. So for strategic process, that's how I use it. For creative process, it's more like a sparring partner. And I don't use it to write emails, but I would use it to summarize action points from a meeting, and then I write the framing. And for a while with the McCarthy Chaos container, we were also using it to brief childcare. And it's like, it's so rude if it does it on its own. Like, it's so useful, but it reads so rude, so cold. But when I was really tired, like I sat down with my nanny at the time, and I was like, look, I am using this thing, like I've built it like this. You can have access to it actually. So you can ask it questions about what we're doing in the week. And so then once she had access to, I would send that email and I'd be like, dear Jenny, blah, 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 blah. Now here's the horrible AI part. And I just paste it in. Like, that's how sensitive I am to not using it as a proxy for my communication. Because I think if you lose human connection, I think people just don't understand like quite what they're losing when they remove themselves from their communication.
Obviously, I agree, but I really appreciate you giving such a specific answer, because one of the reasons I started this series is because people just give a blanket answer to how they're using AI, and it doesn't really inform anybody or give anybody any ideas themselves of what they could be using AI for. And actually, not sharing information makes people scared. So being informed is to be armed, and I really appreciate you going into detail. Thank you.
Of course.
And thank you very much for this whole conversation. It's gone far too quickly. There's so many other things I wanted to ask you. Might have to get you back for a part two, but I need to let you get on with your day.
Well, I would always love to do a part two, and we should definitely. I know it was, I think it was 2017 then that we last saw each other, which is still not 14 years ago, but still 9 years ago. So let's make sure we don't leave it so long next time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it was good to have a quick catch up. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Vicky.